Okay, please be seated, everyone. Good afternoon, ACS crowd. On behalf of our president, Russ Feingold, our ACS board, myself, and all of the ACS staff, we welcome you to ACS's 2022 National Convention. You're probably going to hear this a lot in the next few days, but let me be the first to say, it is so great to see so many familiar faces and new faces as we gather for the first time in 3 years for an in-person convention. We miss you. I also want to welcome and acknowledge all of our members and friends who are participating virtually. We are thrilled to be able to offer a virtual convention experience for those who are unable to join us here in Washington, D.C. I'm incredibly honored to introduce the 2 women who will help us kick off our national convention today. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and her former law clerk, Tiffany Wright. I don't think anyone who was there will forget the last time Justice Sotomayor joined us for a national convention in 2018. She was still recovering from shoulder surgery. Hope you're okay, Justice.
I fully recovered.
And we had been told in advance that because of her injury, the Justice wouldn't be shaking a lot of hands or hugging folks. But no sooner did she get on stage than she gave a big hug to the ACS student member who introduced her. Then about 20 minutes into her conversation with ACS board member Melissa Murray, the Justice stepped off the stage and began walking through the crowd. For the next 20 minutes, while continuing her conversation with Melissa, Justice Sotomayor shook hands and hugged folks, offered kind words to awestruck students and lawyers, sharing heartfelt reunions with former law clerks and spouses of former clerks. For all the obvious reasons, that won't be happening today, right?
Well,
But
it could. Look, I know it's a personal choice, but for reasons that I think most of you know, I value my health because I'm at risk for reasons many of you are not. I am willing to go into the crowd and take off my mask if everyone here is masked. So if you're willing to put on masks and put it over your nose, then both Tiffany and I can unmask and go walking. It's not comfortable talking through a mask, and I'm prepared to do it, obviously, if you choose differently. But if not for you, certainly for me. If you mask up, I will come down into the audience.
Wow. So I think that sounds like a resounding yes. And we have staff who will walk through the audience with masks in case you do not have any. So we have a contract here, guys. You're masking up, right? Excellent.
So if you raise the lights a little bit, because I don't know about you, but I can't see out there now.
Not at all.
I can't
Meaning
even.
raise the overhead lights.
Mm-hmm. We'll ask our support to do that while I continue. How about I continue? And
You
then
continue.
We'll gauge after that. There we go. And we'll keep it that way so that we can see out here, okay? Does that work for you, Justice?
Better, thank you.
Better, okay, excellent. Well, we're really excited about this then, and thank you for that. And thank all of you. In her 13 years on the court, Justice Sotomayor, the first and still only Hispanic, Latina, and woman of color on the court right now, has served as a clear-eyed and impassioned voice applying the law while recognizing the humanity of those to whom the law is applied. In her dissent in a 2014 affirmative action case, Justice Sotomayor remarked that the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race, and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination. A few years later, in a case about the admissibility of evidence discovered as a result of an unconstitutional police stop, the justice declared, "We must not pretend that the countless people who are routinely targeted by police are isolated. They are the canaries in the coal mine whose deaths, civil and literal, warn us that no one can breathe in this atmosphere. They are the ones who recognize that unlawful police stops corrode all our civil liberties and threaten all our lives. Until their voices matter too, our justice system will continue to be anything but, end quote. These are just a few telling examples of who Justice Sotomayor is as a jurist and as a person. And helping us to get to know Justice Sotomayor, the person, a little bit better today is one of her former law clerks, Tiffany Wright. Tiffany is amazing and someone I encourage all of you to get to know. Her journey and drive are unbelievable, and we're really lucky to have her join us here today. A graduate of Georgetown Law Center, Tiffany clerked for the Justice during the 2016-2017 term. Tiffany now serves as Associate Counsel to the President in the Office of the White House Counsel, and she's here in her personal capacity today. Before recently taking this position, she was co-director of the Human and Civil Rights Clinic at Howard University School of Law and a senior associate, wow, okay, all right, at Orrick Harrington Sutcliffe, where she devoted a significant part of her practice to civil rights cases in federal and state appellate courts. Please join me in welcoming both Tiffany and Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Hi, Justice.
This is for you, too.
Oh, no, it's all for you. And thank you so much for allowing me to have this conversation with you in front of a few hundred of our closest friends. So there are guardrails for our conversation. And I remember when I was a law student and I came to an event like this and I paid my admission and Justice Ginsburg was there and they gave the disclaimer I'm about to give now, and I was disappointed because I thought she was going to tell me the real from behind the scenes. But instead, she said what I will say to all of you, which is no discussion of political issues or issues that may be or come before the court, no discussion of opinions or persons connected to the court. But Justice, can you tell people like me why that is so important, especially now, even though there's so much about the court that we might want to ask you?
It's that especially now, Tiffany, that I want to ask you to explain to me. All right? So I'll start explaining why I raised those guide rails from the first day I became a justice. Many of you are young lawyers. Every time you go into court and you argue before a judge, you are hopeful that you will be Clarence Darrow and convince that judge of the righteousness of your position. Now, you're a lawyer, so I hope when you do that, you go in having evaluated the strengths and weaknesses of your case, and that you won't be totally blinded to what realities might be in terms of the strengths or weaknesses of your case. But there is a need in lawyers and in everyone who comes into the contact with the judicial system to genuinely believe that the judge that you're appearing before does have an open mind. What does that mean? You can't ask a judge to have studied legal issues the way we do in case after case, and having read the briefs in the case before him or her, having read all of the lower court opinions that have described and opined on those legal issues. You can't expect that judge not to have an inclination of the way they think they will rule, because you have to have a working hypothesis when you enter oral argument or you're listening to people before you, to be able to ask intelligent questions about what the holes might be in their argument, or what the strengths might be, but what weaknesses those strengths will engender in other cases. So with all of that background, you go in realistically knowing the judge is of a mind. But you need to believe, and you should rightly believe, that a judge can be convinced. If not by your argument, especially before the Supreme Court, by the questions of my colleagues, by our discussion at conference. And it doesn't mean that any of our votes necessarily change at the end of the argument, but it does mean that we have an open mind. And so for me, I hope that people, or I expect, that if I don't participate in prejudging cases by talking about political issues and my views on them, that I don't use the media and this sort of rhetoric to try to convince my colleagues, but to save it for the moments that count, which is in the moments that we're in conversation, that's more important. And that's why, for me, commenting on social issues is not important, because I'm one voice. The more important voices are all of you. Instead of asking me how I feel about a question, ask yourselves. I'll get to vote if the issue comes before me, and my voice will be heard, I can assure you. But yours won't unless you form the opinions, unless you study the questions, and unless you think through what you believe the right answer is. And then do something about it. If you think the court's going in the wrong direction, then you have to work at making the changes to get it on the right course, whether through legislation or whatever methods are necessary in terms of lobbying, do it. But I think justices and judges might have oversized voices about what right answers can be, and us opining on it ultimately hurts public confidence. And so I guess now I ask you, why do you think it's particularly important today?
For the reasons you just stated, right? No, really, because it's a time where everyone
She didn't do this when she was a law clerk for me. Agree with me this readily.
No, it's a time where people are especially focused on the court and what's happening, and we want to know what's going on behind the scenes. But for the reasons you just stated, it's best for us to do our job and speak in the arenas where we can use our voices instead of coming into your arena, and we want to expect there that there's an objective bench, and you can't really be objective if you are telling people in settings like this what you think about all of the issues. So
yeah, I mean, you can't prejudge things, and you shouldn't as a judge. You shouldn't as a human being. If you're going to be making a decision, you should always keep an open mind and be welcoming of arguments. You may have thought they weren't persuasive before, but you don't know how circumstances could make them persuasive later.
right. On the topic of the current state of events in the world, we're living in a time where public confidence in institutions generally seems to be declining. And until recently, the judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court, had enjoyed relatively steady confidence from the public. And Gallup is now reporting that for the first time since they started polling on the issue, public confidence in the court has plummeted and is at its lowest point. So why should the public continue to have confidence in its institutions of government, including the Supreme Court?
Institutions are made up by human beings. Because we are human, by necessity, we make mistakes. It is the nature of the human enterprise that people, as judges, as politicians, as presidents, as whatever, that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have errors of judgment. What you believe in is an institutional structure, our government, how it operates together, the three branches of government, the checks and balances in the way they operate, and in the people who created us. You are as equal, if not the fourth branch of government, and perhaps the most important, because you vote. And you are the ones who elect, or at least indirectly appoint, the other branches. And to that end, when we as institutions have made mistakes, other parts of the branches, because the four work in tandem. Remember, I created the people as the fourth now. The people have worked to make changes. Think of, and I've just recently done a very close study of Dred Scott, because I've done a talk about it for the Parks Department just in the last week, and I took a deep dive in a way I never had before. Dred Scott is reputed to be, and I happen to agree, one of the worst decisions of the Supreme Court. It's hyperbole to say that it caused the Civil War. It didn't cause a war. But it is the decision used on both sides of the Civil War to motivate their respective adherents to fight a just war. The North used the Dred Scott decision to tell the northern states that the southern states were looking to spread slavery throughout the country. The southern states were talking about the Republicans undoing the Constitution by not following it and not respecting the southern states' rights to have slaves, and we ended up in a civil war. And the Civil War in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment directly undid the three rulings of the Dred Scott case. Took a war. But it took nearly another century before Brown versus Board of Education and a pit stop of incredible impact, Plessy versus Ferguson, blessing separate but equal, for civil rights leaders in 1954 to have finally won the battle of freedom and civil rights, started in Plessy in Dred Scott and ended in Brown versus Board of Education to make all people equal under the Constitution. But that was all four branches working together. And it took the efforts of all of those branches in different ways to secure the equality that we're still seeking to defend today and to promote. But it can be lost if we don't all play our part. And I think for my motivation that I want to give you as young lawyers is, Dred Scott lost his 11-year battle for freedom in the courts. And he died a year after Dred Scott was decided. Never even got to enjoy the freedom he had bought because one of the people who helped him in his legal battle, the son of his original slave owner, secured his debt to buy his freedom, but he hardly got to breathe it before he died. Yet he won the war. And so that's why I think we have to have continuing faith in the court system, in our system of government, in our ability, I hope not through war, but through constitutional amendment, to change in legislation, towards lobbying, towards continuing the battle each day, to regain the public's confidence that we, as a court, as an institution, have not lost our way. We as a society have taken stops some may disagree with. But if we disagree, we will continue to battle to do justice. I truly believe in the magical words, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And I can't keep going unless I continue to believe that, and I have to inspire all of you to continue believing in that.
Yeah. This is why I love you. I asked that question looking for exactly the wisdom that you just gave to all of us, so thank you. One of the reasons when I talk to my students and talk to other folks for some of the lack of confidence or feelings of representation is that the court has not often looked like the population that is governed by its opinions. And so you are the first Latina. We just saw the Senate confirm the first Black woman. What is the significance of women on the court and the significance of diversity in general?
When Justice Kagan induction day arrived, President Obama visited the court, as most presidents do, the moments before the induction. And he bent over to kiss Justice Ginsburg and said to her something like, "Are you happy I brought you yet another sister?" And Ruth paused and said, "I'll be happier when there are 8 others."
That's right.
All right. That was my friend. And I also remember, and I think I may have told you this story, that one day we were either at lunch or at a conference, but a group of the justices were together, and we were discussing a book, Scorpions. And Scorpions is a book by Noah Feldman that talks about the really poisonous relationship among justices in the 1930s and 1940s. And someone mentioned that had changed dramatically, that wasn't our court today. And someone else asked, what do you think caused that change? And the other justices around the room were attributing it to this Chief Justice, that Chief Justice. And silently in the corner, Ruth said, "It's when Sandra came to the court." And they paused, and she paused, and she said, "Do any of you remember that Sandra was the one who forced us to resume our lunches after conference and oral argument?" And she was. She also introduced movie nights, and we just celebrated one with one of my other colleagues, a male, recently. She introduced the concept of civility, of disagreeing agreeably. And she literally took it upon herself, and I heard this from the chief judge when I came, that she insisted that everyone attend the lunch. And if you didn't, she would come to your office, sit in front of your chair, and say, "Why aren't you coming?" And when you gave a bunch of excuses, she would say, "That's not acceptable." And she would pick you up and walk you to the lunchroom. There is a civility that women introduce, and not all women. I don't want to presume that all women are the same. Some, I've been tarnished or painted with the brush of being brass and too assertive and too aggressive. So I don't
Me
buy,
too, Justice.
it just comes with the game, okay? It's not that we're the same, but I think generally speaking, that there is a sense of collegiality, a sense of cooperativeness that women tend to insist upon. And as I said, not all, but I do think that Ruth was right, that it makes a difference. Now, that's one part of your question. The other part, which is, I think, equally important, and I've often told this story, how many of you remember, and I think it was just recently brought back, that picture of the very young African-American boy touching President Obama's hair? And I think that it's blazoned in my mind. And I believe I read that recently that the president re-met him as an adult. And so it was a touching moment in and of itself. But that moment really captures the impact of people seeing someone like themselves in positions of power. As one of my girlfriends told me during the nomination process when I was complaining about the rigors of the process and how horrible it was and why did I choose to do this, et cetera, she looked at me and she said, "Sonia, this is not about you. This is about my 8-year-old daughter seeing someone like herself in one of the highest positions in the United States and knowing that she too has a chance." And I think that that is such a critical reason for diversity, because we need to ensure everyone who's a part of our society that we have an equal chance to achieve our dreams. And people won't believe it unless they see examples of it. It's easy to say we're a free country, it's a great opportunity for freedom and achievement, but if they don't see themselves in those positions, they're never going to believe it. And so for me, that's why having people of color, all people represented in our governing institutions.
And it's a similar phenomenon with the advocates. And so the people who are presenting argument at the court, it's rare for it to be minorities and specifically women of color. The last time a Black woman argued was the year I was with you when Christina Swarns argued Buck versus Davis. And so that is a problem as well, that we are governed by decisions and are not often in a position to put our case directly before the court as advocates. So how can we change that?
Well, realistically, and also going slightly back to the previous question, it's hard to get representation on a court that changes, that doesn't change regularly. We've had an enormous period of change on the Supreme Court in the last 10 years, less than 10 years. But generally, most people live a lifetime without there being more than one change on the court as a whole. And so to get representation is not easy. You've got to wait long periods of time, okay? But it's almost the same with argument. We're hearing, 60 to 65 cases a year? It's not a lot of cases that give the opportunity for advocates to appear before the court. It's also important to remember that it's not a training ground for lawyers either, because we're dealing with the most important legal questions facing the country. And every case we grant, it's not the individual case that is at risk. It's the rule of law. And it's the rule of law that's going to bar or give permission to whole swaths of the society. And so you need finely or refined lawyers to argue those cases well. That takes training. And I can't tell you the number of cases where I've sat there and put, figuratively, my hands over my head. Why did that lawyer, this is their first argument, why didn't they hand this over to somebody who knew what they were doing? That's the worst feeling that I have as a justice. And I keep those notes, all right? And someday I'm going to write an article about it because it's a fine line. It's a fine line of when someone's ready or not, but the line is often drawn by the individual. And you really have a responsibility to watch others argue cases. If it's your first time coming before the Supreme Court, and you have to look within your soul and say, am I truly ready or not? And if you have any doubt, you should hand the case over. But it takes that self-awareness to do that. But training is the most important thing. And training includes serving on the lower courts, district or circuit, trying to serve on the Supreme Court, and then working for people who will train you in situations where you will get the training. Join law firms that have appellate practices. Join law firms that have appellate practices that encourage young people or who let you take pro bono cases that'll get you to the court. Many of the young lawyers who have been appearing before me, my former clerks, have been doing it in law firms who have given them the opportunity to have their first arguments before the court. And so there are firms that encourage that, and those are the firms you look for. But I was just before meeting with a dear, dear friend, a judge on a Minnesota court, who asked me that question about how do I increase diversity in my hiring? And I'm going to give credit to one of my law clerks who, working with her prior Court of Appeals judge, he asked her the same question, and she and one of her co-clerks gave him a whole memo on how to increase clerk hiring of people of diverse backgrounds. And one of the recommendations they made, I took to heart, and that was that we as judges have the power and have the responsibility to reach out to law school professors whose judgment we trust, and to tell them that it is our expectation that they will give us diverse recommendations for law clerks, and that we expect them to actually mentor students of color from their very first day in law school till the day they get them on the court. Because that's really what you need, is mentors who are going to work actively to get you hired. And so we as judges can do that. Students as students can ensure that they look for people as mentors who will help them do that. And it doesn't mean looking for those professors of color in your school. It means looking for professors who you know feed justices, clerks, and challenging them to work with you. You know, you can go up to people and say, I want to be successful. I know you know how, teach me. And people will respond if you're that direct. And that means working hard. And when they give you advice, don't slough it off. Follow it, okay? But I shouldn't say that, because I ignored some of the advice of some mentors. But the point is that to fix this problem, we're going to have to work at every level. We're going to have to work at the law school level to push more of our kids into clerkships in major places that will get them into law firms where they will argue eventually cases before the Supreme Court. We need more people of color in positions like the Solicitor General's office, Bristow Fellows. If you're a law student and don't know what a Bristow Fellowship is, something's wrong. You should be aware of what it is. It's an internship, essentially, at the Solicitor General's office. But many Bristow Fellows end up with Supreme Court clerkships. Others end up in those appellate advocacy courses. And then finally, study the court. Prepare yourself for those opportunities. Study our cases, think about them, listen to oral arguments, start molding your own presentations in lower courts with the knowledge of how you have to be prepared eventually for a Supreme Court argument. It's never going to be easy for the reasons I explained. People are just not going to hand you a Supreme Court argument. But all of us can play a part in encouraging the diversity that you're talking about, Tiffany.
Yes.
You're doing that. You went to Howard to do that.
That's right. Shout out to Howard.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned from you, both through working with you and...
You know, we haven't walked around. Come on.
Yes.
We got them to wear
Let's
masks
do that.
and then we didn't walk around. Come on.
And do you mind if, as we walk, I ask you this
No, I
question?
want you to ask it. I can
right.
actually multitask a little bit.
Great.
All right. Go
So,
ahead.
the
I'm going to go
question-
on one end and another. We
I'll go
won't
this way.
scream, but you know,
Yes.
we'll talk.
The question was, stems from a quote that I heard some time ago in an interview, and the quote is, "What punishments of God are not gifts?" And it speaks to learning to appreciate things that we really wish hadn't happened. And so the reason I thought about you when I read this quote is, I was reading your middle school book with my son, and you write about things that are difficult. Losing your dad at a young age, having a chronic illness, growing up in the projects, but shout out to girls from the projects because we run the world. And, but you write about them not from a place of pain or negativity necessarily, but an appreciation for what you've gained from them. So can you talk about the value of adversity and how it has made you a better person, a better justice, a better judge?
You know, Tiffany, your question shows me how much more educated than you are than I am sometimes. When you said the words, I was thinking of that song, It's a popular song, and I bet the young people here will be able to remind me of the exact words, but something about a woman being left by a boyfriend, and she sings something like, "You thought you would kill me, but I have survived."
Yes.
What's the actual words to that song? But it's the same concept. If it doesn't kill me, if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger.
That's right.
Thank you. That's it. You see, I told you one of them. If it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. And so, yeah, that is what adversity does to you. It forces to find the best and strongest part of yourself. It forces you to be inventive about ways to face the problem and get around them. It forces you to look at your soul and say, will I survive? I will. Now, can you do that without adversity? And I will say to every parent in this room, because most of you are affluent, you have one heck of a challenge. Because that is the 100% question that all of my relatives who came up in circumstances similar to mine are asking about their children. Will they be able to do as much as we did? Because they have not grown up with our hardship. And I don't know, but I think so. I say I don't know because I don't know if you don't suffer a little bit, whether you realize, and maybe a lot, whether you realize and accept how much that helps you become a better person. And it does. It helps you to forgive weaknesses in other people. One of the biggest things that I realized was the people who loved me the most, particularly my father, because I knew how desperately he loved me. But that love wasn't enough not to let it kill himself. He died of alcoholism. He couldn't stop drinking. And what that made me realize is that people do things in life. They're responsible for the choices. We all pay for our choices. My dad paid for his, okay? But I could forgive him. I could look and say, we as human beings are not perfect. But it doesn't mean we're horrible people. We do wrong things. Every parent in this room has had a child look at them and say, don't you love me anymore? And every parent has said, are you silly? Yes, I love you. I just don't like what you did. Think about that. I thought about it when I was a district court judge, and I had defendants before me, and some of them did some horrible, horrible crimes. But I still had to look for their humanity. Didn't stop me from punishing them, and some of them I punished very harshly. That's not the point. I wasn't there to play God and judge them. I was there to impose a sentence and do it in a respectful way. And so I think that's what adversity teaches you. And it is my hope that those who don't suffer adversity think about that in trying to put themselves in the shoes of other people and know what the value of struggle is. Know what the value of hardship is, and at least be grateful for what you have and not resentful of what other people have had to work for. So you're saying, yes, it is true, and you are right. And I do think it is important to understand that hardship can be a gift from God, not a punishment.
Yes. I'm going to ask.
You have babies here. You're not babies, you're grown young men and women, but I'm very happy to see you all. That's not going to be a very good picture. Hello, you guys. Hello.
I'm going to ask you one more question, Justice, and then I think we'll turn it over to a couple of audience questions that we have.
Sure.
So disagreement. One of the things that I learned the year I was with you is the importance of engaging with people with whom I deeply disagree. And I remember one time there was someone who came to the court to give a talk, and I really didn't want to hear anything that this person had to say because I disagreed with them. And I thought I was going to sneak and work through the lunch, but you caught me and you made me go. And you said that I had to go because you never know what you'll learn from unexpected sources. And so why did you make me do that? and how do you go about cultivating relationships with people with whom you really, really disagree?
Tiffany, you went, right?
I did.
And you actually came away conflicted, didn't you?
I did. I really did.
And you came away conflicted because the person was charming, correct?
That's right.
And you thought to yourself, how can they believe what they believe?
Exactly.
I can't talk. Oh my God.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to hug you.
Hi. The one thing I spoke about before, about people doing wrong things but not being bad people necessarily, I believe that about everyone. I believe that there's good in every single human being. And it doesn't matter what their political views are. I understand that human beings share basic human values and kind. How many of you remember the Shakespeare line by Shylock, where he goes on and on about, don't we bleed the same, okay? We do have those common human emotions. And so with every single person that I meet, particularly if I disagree with them, I try to find the goodness in them. I try to find what part of them can we communicate with together. And so I may have used, and I have used as an example, my relationship with Justice Clarence Thomas. I suspect, maybe this is not true anymore, but I suspect I have probably disagreed with him more than with any other justice. That we have not joined each other's opinions more than anybody else. And yet, Justice Thomas is the one justice in the building that literally knows every employee's name, every one of them. And not only does he know their names, he remembers their families' names and histories. He's the first one who will go up to someone when you're walking with him and say, is your son okay? How's your daughter doing in college? He's the first one that when my stepfather died, sent me flowers in Florida. He is a man who cares deeply about the court as an institution, about the people who work there, but about people. He has a different vision than I do about how to help people and about their responsibilities to help themselves. I've often said to people, Justice Thomas believes that every person can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I believe that some people can't get to their bootstraps without help. They need someone to help them lift their foot up so they can reach those bootstraps. That's a very different philosophy of life. But I think we share a common understanding about people and kindness towards them. That's why I can be friends with him and still continue our daily battle over our difference of opinions in cases. But you really can't begin to understand an adversary unless you step away from looking at their views as motivated in bad faith, but until you can look at their views and think about what the human reaction is that's motivating those views. What are they afraid of? What is it that inside of them moves them to be seeing the world in this way? You can't begin to engage them unless you can do something about that conversation. And so, yes, I have friends of all backgrounds and friends of all political views, and I will continue to do so because that's important to me, understanding how I can make the best pitch long term to achieve the goals that I think are important.
Thank you, Justice. I think we have a few audience questions, and I'm not sure where you are, but if you could.
Right here.
Perfect.
Oh, I'm right here.
All right, who is it? And tell me who you
Where
are.
is she? Okay, there she is.
Hold on, Regis, you're blocking my way. There,
Right
okay.
here.
I'll come around and give you a hug as soon as I walk around this way, okay?
Thank you, thank you. Hi, Justice Sotomayor. My name is Gabriela Barbosa, and I am a board member of the American Constitution Society. I am also a co-chair of the Los Angeles Lawyer Chapter, and have dedicated my career to advocating for the rights of children of color. I had the great privilege of meeting you over a decade ago in 2011 when you came to Columbia Law School, and I was a 2L, and you spoke to the Latino Law Students Association. And at that time, I was a part of a small group of Latinas who were at the law school, and the first generation of my family to go to law school and graduate. And my path was not straightforward, and it was difficult at times. But listening to you speak was incredible motivation for me to keep going. So thank you so much for coming at that time. I will forever cherish that memory. So now—
That's why I keep going back to law school.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
So now that so many from underrepresented communities in the legal profession are attending and graduating from law school, my question is, what guidance do you have for first-generation lawyers who might find themselves in spaces where their lived experiences might not be shared by other people and might not even be understood?
First of all, in every experience that most of us from our challenged backgrounds come from, every space we're going to enter, we're going to be different. And I do think there is value in knowing that one of the things that's important is for you to take the time to explore their lived experiences, to talk to people who are different than you, to understand where their worldview and self-identity comes from. So I have a dear, dear friend. We lost touch in college, and he was from Oregon. And my friend pined that he was at Princeton. When I say pined, he really was sad most of our 4 years. And one evening we were sitting around, and I just said to him, "Why do you miss it so much? What's there?" And he just sat there for over 2 hours talking about the physical beauty of Oregon. And he talked about what a deep clash it was to see the urban environment, to have lights that block the stars. I'd never even thought that lights block stars. I came from New York City, okay? I was in Princeton, which is still, a little bit suburban, but still urban, okay? I didn't see stars until I went once to Phoenix, okay? Seriously, they had to take me out to the desert for me to see things I had never seen before. But he had described it to me, and he talked about a blue sky in a way that I had never, ever experienced in my life. And that conversation started us on other conversations about how different my world was. And so I think when you're in new environments, one of the hardest things to do is to seek out people who are different from you, to learn about them, and in that learning be open enough to share with them your different experience and to talk about how that affects you in your life and in the work you're doing. People will open up if you're open with them, but you have to show interest in them first to get that. And so I do think that one of the opportunities that kids from our environment have to go to places like I did, Princeton and Yale, is that I got to meet these people who were so different than me, and that I got the ability to call many of them friends. And I hope that that will be what you will do in your life and in your environment. Make friends of them.
Thank you, Justice.
So I think we have time for one more. And we'll take one of the audience questions. Yep.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, my name's Taylor McLean. My pronouns are she and her. And like you, Justice, I'm also from the Bronx. And I'm a rising third-year law student at the University of Georgia School of Law and the former president of our chapter, our student chapter. So before law school, I chose an interdisciplinary major for undergrad. And I see a lot of value at looking at a problem from multiple different perspectives and disciplines. So my question for you is, outside of the field of law, what field do you recommend that progressive lawyers look to for inspiration or for a new perspective on their work?
You know, that's such a fascinating question. And I don't think that I have had time or have reflected on that before. So maybe over time I'll think of a different answer, but I'll give you the one that I think of today. Go study religion. I don't mean go study Catholicism or Judaism or Muslims issues. Study them all. I think the tensions that we experience in our society, the wars that are being fought, virtually all of them are religiously motivated. And I do think that there is something about religious doctrine that inspires passion in people in a way sometimes that's not rational, by the way. But it's understanding how that happens and why that's important as a perspective that we need to have. Because it can be what leads a society into wars. We certainly have that already occurring. And unless you understand what those motivations are, you really have no way of knowing how to combat or try to diffuse them to help the society avoid that kind of mechanism for dispute resolution. I didn't do that in college, but that doesn't mean that today I wouldn't. And in fact, for years, I've been encouraging students to take religion courses, comparative religion courses in college, because I do believe that's a perspective that we need. And if you think about the entrenched partisanship that we're living in, it's almost religious in fervor, isn't it? And so I think that that study might be helpful. So you may be a little bit too far along to go back to that, but I do have a lot of other young people around here. By the way, I told all of my nieces and nephews and godchildren to do it, and none of them followed my advice.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Okay.
So
Now,
Justice,
where was the other?
I said one more question, but I'm going to add one more.
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite questions to ask you, which is we started the conversation talking about public confidence
Yes.
in institutions. But as lawyers, a lot of us came into this because we are committed to social justice. We want to do good in the world. And it's gotten really hard. And so why should we as lawyers continue to have hope?
You have any choice?
I have none.
Right. That's the answer for everyone in this room. You can throw up your hands, you can lie down and let the truck run you over. Or you can get up and build the barricades, and I don't mean this figuratively. I don't mean this literally, I mean it figuratively. You can get up and with all your might, try to stop that collision. I don't think I have a choice. Neither do you. None of us were born to be bystanders in life, to let things just happen to us. It's not acceptable to say that I'm a product of something that I can't control. Yes, you can. Your destiny is in your hands, in our hands, working together. And so for me, look, there are days I get discouraged. There are moments where I am deeply, deeply disappointed. And yes, there have been moments where I've stopped and said, is this worth it anymore? And every time I do that, I lick my wounds for a while. Sometimes I cry. And then I say, okay, let's fight.
Yes.
You go back up here. My mask, I don't know what you're doing. Am I going back up here, or what are we
You
doing?
can go back up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Justice, thank you so much for a great conversation. And thanks to all of you for being such
here.
a great audience and listening to the conversation. And with that, I think we're
done?
I think we're done.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
We will now be taking a short break. Snacks and beverages are available in the Independence foyer, and hotel check-in is now open. Please join us at 4 p.m. for the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation workshop in the Capitol Room. Consult the online convention schedule on the Chime app for more details. Volunteers will be on site to help direct you. Thank you.